Welcome to this corporate overview and scrutiny committee. It's 7 o'clock or a little after, so we'll make a start. Just to remind everybody that this evening's proceedings are being live streamed for publication on the Council's website. So item 1 is to receive apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes, so we've had apologies from Councillor Cathy Kent, Councillor Abbas and Councillor Holloway, and we've got Councillor Cecil, Councillor Kelly and Councillor Manoir in as substitutes.
Thank you. Thank you to all those who are substituting tonight. So item 2 is to receive the minutes of the meeting on the 30th of July. I would like to move that the minutes are approved. Before I do, are there any comments on the minutes? No? Okay, we can take them as approved then. Thank you. Item 3 is to receive items of urgent business. I've not been notified of any urgent items or agreed to any urgent items, so we can take it there are none. Are there any declarations of interest? There's none from me. No declarations of interest. Thank you. So that takes us to item 5, which is to receive the Q1 forecast revenue and capital outturn report. Who's presented this? Please. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So tonight we have got in front of you our first performance report of the budget for 2024-25. The report covers a range of subjects. So we have I'll only go over in very high level details in terms of the numbers and maybe open it up the questions. That might be easy, so I'll assume that you've read the report. So as we can see, a bulk of the report covers our forecast performance against the Council's revenue account. So at this point in time, we are forecasting a net pressure of £3 million, which is 2% of our revenue budget. And we have got, obviously, our focus for the remainder of the year is reducing that to zero pressure. I won't go over all these elements if that's okay, but the report also covers our performance against the HRA, the dedicated schools grant. We detail the position on our reserves. And then the other area that we put in some detail is our performance against our capital programme. So our big two programmes in the year, our revenue budget and our capital programme. So and as you can see on our capital programme, we are forecasting an underspend of about 16% on our capital programme for the remainder of this year. The other key area that the report covers is our performance against the savings built into our revenue account. So we have a significant sum of savings, so it's just under £20 million built into our revenue account. As part of our monthly budget monitoring procedures, we check very carefully with our service directorates how they're performing against these targets. And as you can see in the report, we rag them. So we have them ragged as blue, which is delivered, and then red, amber, green. And as you can see, at this point in the year, we are forecasting that 4% of our just under £20 million is currently red, but the remainder of these, we've got 35% that are delivered, and we have got 38% on track, and we're keeping an eye on 21% to make sure those ambers go to green. So I don't propose, if it's okay with everybody, that I go through every single element of the report. It's probably better if we open it up for questions.
Thank you. Yep, I agree. Well, I'll throw it open for questions. Just a quick one from me, then I'll throw it open to members and then come back for any questions I've got. A not insignificant amount of the overspend, £1.2 million, is as a result of an overestimation in respect of the COVID grant. That's quite a significant overestimation. How did we arrive at that? I mean, what due diligence was done to it's not a minor variance, is it? It's quite a significant amount, and I'm a bit flabbergasted at how that overestimation was arrived at.
So your question is in relation to the COVID sales fees and charges scheme repayment, so 1.2 million. So during the COVID period, councils were allowed to claim for their loss of fees and charges income during the COVID period. It was, having done this at my old authority, it was quite a tricky task to do in terms of estimating. What's happened here, and this is, you know, I can only explain limited information, is that when that claim has been made, the claim has been for £1.2 million over what we've actually, the income that we actually lost. Um, it's quite hard for me to say why that happened because and I'm not making excuses, but I wasn't here. But it was a very difficult scheme to forecast. And obviously, if we had any scheme like that again, then we would make sure that as you go through that process of claims, you'd have it reconciled very closely to your revenue, so that what you are forecasting in your monthly revenue budget monitoring report is balancing to the claim that you have submitted to MHCLG.
Okay, I said I'd throw it open, but before I do, just one other observation from me. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that the overspend would be considerably more if there wasn't this over-reliance almost on reserves. And I think your report actually mentions that the reserves are there for a reason, and you can only draw down on them so much. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that that figure, that overspend, would be a lot worse if it wasn't for that reliance on reserves, and that kind of masks the unhealthy position that I think we're in. I know you've mentioned that is addressed in the report, but is it fair to say, from the committee's perspective, is it fair to say that things would be a lot worse if we didn't have recourse to those reserves? And what are we doing to make sure that reserves stay in a healthy balance?
I don't think it's fair to say that the use of the reserves is masking the position on the revenue account. Reserves are there for a specific purpose, and the agreement on the reserves is that we use it for one-off expenditure. So it's expenditure that will not continue into future years. And a number of these reserves, particularly, for example, if I pick up on the children's services, that is grant money that we have received in. It has to be spent on specific areas. The grant money has gone onto the reserve because we haven't spent it in the year in which it relates. Then when we spend that money, we draw the money down from the reserve to match that expenditure. So in terms of reserves, what we are doing is the reserves that we are using are one-off money that's intended for that purpose. What we are not doing is, for example, what would be more concerning is if we have a £3 million overspend at the end of the financial year and we start drawing down reserves just to cover that, because that problem carries forward into the next financial year. And that is why the focus is very much on, we're being very transparent at this point in the year to explain that we have some pressures. It would be highly unlikely if we did have any pressures, but there is a very clear steer that we need to we need to bring this budget down to zero, so we have no impact into next year.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to continue the line of questioning that you started yourself over the reserves. I wonder if I could just ask, in terms of 5.2, the total transfer from reserves, is this meant to be a specific sort of one-off transfer of reserves? And if so, what would be the plan for eventually replenishing the reserves?
Is that in relation to the 1.2?
I'm just talking about the assumed total transfer of reserves of 10.6 million on paragraph 5.2. It's just, yeah, because I was interested in the answer you gave the Chair, and I'd just sort of like to carry on that thread.
So some of those reserves, as I explained, are money that we have received that are specific for that expenditure. So we have a reserve, it is drawn down for that purpose. That money will not be replenished, because it is specific money that we've either earmarked in the past or it is a specific grant money, so that will not be replenished. In terms of the money that we are using for our transformation implementation, once again, that is money that has been set aside in a reserve in prior years. We are drawing that money down, and it once again will not be replenished unless we make a conscious effort to replenish that reserve. So, for example, when we had the outturn report, that came, I think it was to June or July Cabinet, at the outturn report, we were reporting a £2 million underspend against the revenue account, and the recommendation was to, rather than use that money to use our support from the government, it was about we recommended to put that money into the transformation reserve to help us manage the transformation that the council needs to do. So this money on the whole will not be replenished into reserves. because it's been earmarked for this use, unless, for example, we have an underspend this year and we would make the same request to put that money into the reserve.
Councillor Kelly, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just very briefly, obviously, there is that overspend in quarter one. Do you feel that, based on the overspend in quarter one, there may be added pressures on quarter two, three and four? Do you have a sort of a rough anticipation on, or a forecast on where we are there? And as there is pressures on quarter one, do you foresee anything in quarter two? Thank you.
What I can't guarantee is we don't know what's coming, because when we do our forecast, we forecast where we think we are going to be at the end of the financial year, so the 31st of March. So we are always thinking about where we are going to be. So it's not just where we think we are now, it's saying at this point in time, where do we think our expenditure and income is going to be at the end of the financial year? I cannot guarantee that something doesn't come through the door to hit us. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately. But what I do know is these forecasting, and SEMA manages the teams that do these forecasting, really good cooperation with the services, and a huge amount of work is being done to get these forecasts accurate. And there is some very sensible, so, you know, for example, on some of our social care budgets, we are forecasting an element of growth to the end of the year. It might not happen, but we're making prudent estimates for that, so that we don't suddenly get a surprise further on down the line. So I think they are as robust as we are, you know, we can make them. We do know, we do monthly budget monitoring internally. We do know at quarter four that our forecast spend has come down by just under £600,000. We have a very clear steer from Sarah that we have to balance this budget, which is absolutely the right thing to do. So at the moment, our numbers are coming down, and what we have tasked, we are now onto our period 5 monitoring. All directorates have been charged for period 5 with coming up with their action plans as to how we are going to get that budget pressure down. So the pressure is coming down. As I say, I have not got a crystal ball. I can't predict if something comes to hit us, but our focus is very, very much on bringing in our expenditure within budget.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yep, Councillor Fox. Did you have a question? Councillor Fox. Sorry.
Yeah, on all the figures that are there, I can't see anywhere where it says how much interest has been made on that huge amount of money. It must be sitting accounts, which must be interest-bearing accounts.
So our interest is, if you look at the table on the first page, our Treasury and Investments budget is £51 million pounds, £51.889 million pounds. That is the cost of our Treasury, of our interest charges and MRP charges. So that's the table. I'm just looking at that's the table, the summary table at the front. It's the last line, Treasury and Investment, 51.899 million.
What page was that on, please?
I think on the corporate ONS agenda, I think it's page 16.
So without having to troll through everything that's there, is there just a bottom line figure of what is the amount of interest?
So our budget for interest payments is £18.7 million, and our budget for minimum revenue provision is £33.1 million.
Councillor Green, did you have a question?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you, Dawn, for your report. On page 10, it says digital and customer services has a 0.194 overspend due to delays in the replacement of the MFD printers. Why and have we got in that contract that if there is a delay, that we don't have to pay this? And if there isn't in that contract, why isn't it?
So this has been some overlap between the contracts that we're having to, so we've got some overlap in the contract. It isn't one contract started and a new one, so we've got some dual running.
In the contract, does it say a set date of when they should be implemented? Who's the fault lie with?
I mean, contracts will have an end, all contracts will have an end date, and existing contracts will have a new date. We've had some overrunning on them contracts, so it's not an issue with the contracts. We have had to have some overrunning with those contracts. We've had to, as we've done the transfer, we've had an element of dual running, which, to be fair, is not unusual. So we've incurred additional costs because of that dual running.
So with the new provider, when is that? Are they meant to be getting in these printers so that number goes down?
This is a one-off. This is a one-off dual running cost, and there were some technical issues as we transferred over the printers. So this is a one-off cost for this year. This cost will not continue because our contract going forward, obviously the cost will remain within them contracts unless there is a negotiation to deviate it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I want to come away from the detail for a second. Just to ask overall, what lessons have you learned from Q1, from what's produced these figures, and how are you going to use those learnings to try and improve the situation in Q2?
That's a very good question, thank you. As I said, I think it's fair to say we've done a huge amount of work at the start of the financial year to make sure that our forecasts are as robust as possible. So we are in the process with Seema and my colleague Caroline, we are in the process of reviewing everything. Processes, how we're doing our forecasting, making sure things balance to the ledger, attaching it to activity data. So we're having a review of everything. Our forecasting methodologies, making sure we've got consistency, making sure we're staying together as a group, everybody understands. So everything, to give you confidence, everything is being, we're basically peeling everything back, checking it all and putting it all back together again so we can make sure that what we report to you is as accurate as we possibly can. We have got really good working relationships with the directorate. So Seema manages the sort of service-facing finance teams. There is regular budget monitoring every month. So the directorates own their forecasts, as they should do, but there is very close support and challenge from the finance directorates to make sure those forecasts are accurate. Those forecasts are signed off by the directorship, so there's ownership about them. We have a really robust savings tracker in place now, and there is a significant amount of challenge about that to make sure that it is accurate. And what we're not going to find is in February somebody says, oh, I thought I was going to do that, but I'm not going to do it. February, it's too late. So we have done a huge amount of work. Moving forward, we can always improve, and I think we will always continue to improve on our forecasting. I think I would be telling a few fibs if I said there still isn't a few little gremlins that we want to sort out. And so we are, and we're sort of doing that because we're also in the process of setting next year's budget. And once again, we are not just doing a roll forward budget, so we're completely refreshing our MTFS for next year and future years to make sure it's all as accurate as we can, and we're looking at them in tandem, because what is very, very important is you look at what's going on in year and you make sure that that is accurately reflected in next year's budget, not just giving people growth because they've got pressures. It's always about how can you manage that, but really making sure that we're looking at the 2 years in tandem so that we set as realistic a budget as we can next year. So there's been a huge amount of work done, and as I say, between the finance teams and the services, but we will continue to every month as we should do.
Thanks. So in terms of, if you like, your processes, in terms of the actual reviewing, tracking, forecasting, you know, I mean, and we can see, you're getting to the stage where you can actually give quite a good picture. But in putting that picture together, has it told you anything particularly significant about the decisions, about the processes behind these figures? What are we doing that has got us here that we need to be doing differently next quarter?
In terms of the budget process, I don't think we do anything different. I suppose what underlines the budget process is the pressures, isn't it? So what is driving that picture that we're showing you at the moment is the pressures. So really what we have to do is we have to tackle the areas of the pressures. Now we have some areas of pressures that we are forecasting for this year, particularly around TA. It's a national problem. It will not go away. Obviously the directorate is looking at a lot of options about how they manage that. But the reality is when we set the budget for next year, we are probably going to have to put more growth in for temporary accommodation. Because otherwise, I have to sign the budget off. I get the challenge that you haven't set a robust budget for next year. So I think our processes are getting much better. But it really is looking at those underlying pressures, what is driving our overspends and how do we tackle that? What is within our gift to tackle? But what are some pressures that, with the best will in the world, are demand driven and we might have to put some additional growth in the budget for? So I've got a pressure against my own services that is predominantly for agency staff. So a big task of Seema and myself and Caroline is how do we really recruit to our positions permanently so we can get permanent staff in and not rely on agency spend. So it's looking at those underlying pressures.
Great, thanks. So clearly, as you say, some of these elements are going to be beyond our control, but do you feel we're getting a better idea of what is within our control, certainly in terms of those pressures, what is within our control and what we need to do about it? This is the bit I think that I'm probably not quite as clear about yet.
I think what we're doing this year, which is really, really helpful, is so what we've got in this report as well is a lot of the activity data. And it's really important for us that we look at the activity data to see what is driving. So for example, if we look at placements, what are the particular placements that we are experiencing pressures on? How do we manage that going forward? What can we manage? What can't we manage? So I think having the activity data in is helping us, because that is what we need to look at, and working with the directorates as best we can in terms of, well, what are your pressures going forward and how we use that to forecast in matter pressures going forward. But also likewise where we've got some where we might have some things are going down or we don't need as much in the budgets, because our biggest challenge for next year is to realign our budgets without putting any further strain, without creating a strain. So I think looking at using the activity data, using a lot of people's intuition, a lot of it is, tackling them underlying issues. We're in a better, I think I think we're doing as good a process as we can.
Thank you.
Yep, Councillor Jones.
Thank you there, Don. So would you say overall we're in a reasonable position, bearing in mind what the pressures that council's got with financial pressures? Are you happy with where we are, if you like?
It's never ideal to have a pressure. It's never ideal, but to have a pressure of that quantum, considering the level of savings that is built into our budget, it's not ideal, but it's not a significant pressure that you think, how are we realistically going to tackle that on a sustainable basis? And the message is incredibly clear internally that this pressure has to come down. We cannot overspend against our budget. So I don't want to be glib and say it's 2% is fine. It's not because it's challenging and we don't know what's coming down the road. But to have a net pressure of £2 million, which has come down to 1.5 this year, considering we've got £20 million built into our budget, we don't have as much flexibility as some other authorities because of our exceptional financial support. That is a position that, to me, with the clear steer from Sarah, that is manageable.
Thank you, Dawn. What I think is always concerning is when, obviously, we know that adults and children's social care, that's always been a high pressure on councils, is where the money to, should we say, to prop that up comes from, and that's what we're always concerned about. Where do you actually look to get them pennies to pay, to bump that one up? And that's always a concerning thing for councillors. So, you know, what ideas have you got? Where are you going to draw it from?
So I think what we've got to do as we go through budget setting for next year, so we're well into budget setting now for next year, and we have to have that complete by the end of September, because we are very committed to bringing a draft, as far as we get a balanced draft budget position to December Cabinet. That is the right thing to do. So what we have to do is, you've got to get that balance right, haven't you, between keeping the pressure on directorates to look at the actions, what can they do, what is a corporate issue that we've got to address, you know, how do we work better across services to address some of these issues. You've got to get that balance right between keeping some of that pressure on, but also looking what are our forecast pressures for next year, what extra additional money have we got coming into our MTFS. So we know, for example, the current MTFS assumes a council tax increase of 4.99%, so some of that funding will come in. We will maybe get some additional grant funding in, and as I say, we have to look within our MTFS and say, where have we, when we review our MTFS line by line, so what our current budget provision is for next year, we have to say, what do people now need, and where can we realign some of that funding. So we know, for example, we've got some provisions in against for next year against some budgets that we think we might not need now, so it's about realigning it. So our biggest challenge is to try and realign those budgets to get them set in the right place, but not put a strain on the bottom line, and we will do that by looking at how we realign. We will look at what additional funding is coming in, what additional grant monies are coming in, what we can do through fees and charges, etc. Now, what we might find is that we can't balance everything, and some, you know, we might have to say that we can do X amount of growth, but we've still got to keep that pressure on in terms of what services and such can do themselves to manage.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? No? Okay. The temptation with these reports is always to drill down into individual items, and I think it's unfair to ask you those kind of detailed questions. I think what, for us as a committee, Q2, I think will show us whether there's a trend, whether there's a pattern in between here and now. I think we can look at whether there are, we know what they are because they're in the report, what the big pressures are, and I think if we've got specific questions on those, it's appropriate for the next meeting to call in the relevant officers rather than sort of field those detailed questions to you. Just having said that, I just want to touch on the Thames side. That, I think I'm right in saying, was a pressure in the last budget, a considerable pressure. Can you just clarify the position with the Thames side now and confirm where is it still a pressure in the budget? The report, I mean, maybe I've misinterpreted it, but the report seems to suggest that's all sort of gone away, but it was a pressure in the last budget.
I might have to come back to you on that. I'm not aware that there is a pressure, but I would like to double check, and I'll come back to the committee. I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if you know, it's good news if it isn't a pressure, but I think what we need to do is reconcile the position now with what we heard when we set in the last budget. Thank you. Okay, so before we move on, are there any final comments, questions? What I will say is, as I've just said, if you know, members, we don't only have to speak to each other at these meetings. If members think that, you know, we need an informal meeting to look at some of these particular pressures, if you think there are officers we need here at the next meeting so that we can specifically focus on some of these issues, then obviously come forward and let's make that clear. Let's not wait until the next meeting, but as I say, Q2 will, I think, give us a clearer picture of what's happening. One final observation. I know commissioners have asked for a report to be brought forward at the next Financial Recovery Board. Is that a report that we can receive as a committee? It does have to be tabled at the next meeting, but once, I'm assuming that report is in draft format now, as they've asked for it by the end of September.
Is that report, because we take a number of updates to the commissioners' meetings. Was there a specific title of the report you were querying?
It says in the report, under Commissioner's comment, that they've asked for a report at the next Financial Recovery Board detailing what action we're taking to recover the overspend. I'd be interested to see that if possible.
Yeah, I mean, it will be pretty much the same as what's in the cabinet report, because it'll be about the overspend. So it won't really change from the cabinet report, but if it does, I can check whether we can release that to you.
I think for my sake, I'd be interested to see, you know, not that I'm curious in any way, anything, but to see whether the sort of level of advice there's a parity. I'd like to. I don't think it is a public report. It won't be a public report per se, will it?
Just to give you assurance, what we are trying to do now is we produce one report that we are using for all other forums. So when we do our finance recovery boards and improvement boards, we use the same data, because that is what we're trying to get to, prepare it once a month or once a quarter for cabinet, do it well, and we use it for multiple sources. So to be fair, we will be saying the same thing.
Okay, so I'd have to make sure you are though. So if we could see it, that'd be helpful. I will just say I think this report is very clear. It's one of the best reportings that I've seen. So thank you for that. There are also some good news stories in here. So thanks to all the staff who are working very hard. I know they are, to bring things back on track. If there's no further comments or questions, I don't think we're specifically asked to agree any recommendations, but I think we can say that we note the content of the report and we await the Q2 reporting. So thank you, Dawn. Thank you, everyone. So we move on to item 6, which is digital and customer progress update. And I think the Chief Digital Officer is going to present this item. So thank you and welcome.
Good evening. Technology, if only we had somebody, from IT, right? So I'm here this evening to talk about all things digital and the progress we've been making since I've started, I believe. But a bit of context, last year, I believe, there was a piece of work done on strategic operating model with a scope and content for the future digital services and the way Council deliver on its contact. Since then, there was a piece of work done on revising digital strategy, including contact and customer experience. And subsequently, we've had our first business case on CRM and voice automation, which we are way on delivery. What that involved was a set of principles, and those are design principles to make sure that whatever we deliver and whatever technology choices that we're making are funded, they meet the needs of our residents and they fit for purpose. Those are now in place and they are guiding the delivery roadmap. What has happened since then is a lot of mapping in terms of processes. I will go through the design principles in a moment, which will make a little bit more sense. But one of the design principles about customer centricity, ensuring that you really understand customer needs and their requirement, the way they want to interact with council services. And for that reason, we have been mapping the customer journeys and processes and defining the new ways of working as well as processes. Each director has been involved to make sure that they fit for purpose again, and we include the technology that meet the purpose. They have been revised and we have categorized those journeys into key blocks that will then enable us to pick on digital services. And those are broadly around apply, report, request, chase, pay, book, and etc. So that work is way underway. We are also working on a wider digital transformation journey with the scope underneath it, which is a massive piece of work. But if we move to principles that are guiding that digital transformation, those are broadly, as I mentioned, customer centricity. So residents' voice is going to be increasingly important in the way we design future technology choices. And we engage in them in a number of ways to define the scope of each of the projects and the way we deliver on those projects, ensuring that the resident is not just at the front of the project, but throughout, including the testing. Accessibility goes hand in hand with that, making sure that technologies that we're implementing and the digital solutions that we're offering as a council are easy, intuitive, and consistent. And that will go hand in hand with digital by design. But what that means is that digital offer is so good that residents and users will choose to interact with us through digital channels rather than calling us or coming for a face-to-face appointment. Data-led is another really important, and I think that that is really important not just for Thurrock but any other local authority. Making sure that we've got access to data, single view of the customer, and skill set to understand the data and inform decision making is going to be increasingly more important. So in a nutshell, those are our 6 principles that are guiding our digital transformation journey and informing the roadmap for delivery. I've mentioned that we've worked last year on operating model. So I will touch on it very briefly if you haven't seen it already. There's 4 layers to that operating model, starting with what I call, it's called in here pre-front door, I call it supported digital, because what it really means is for the vulnerable groups that haven't got access to digital tools or skill set, or there's language barriers, we still provide that service just as well as the digital means of interacting with us. But what we want to do is still drive that digital shift, and we'll hopefully achieve that through support. And that will be offered through libraries, that will be offered through community engagement and any other means that council can offer. And as the customers are coming for the face-to-face appointments, either to access the PC or they haven't got the Wi-Fi or they just don't know how to use it, they will be guided. And hopefully with time they will be able to support themselves. We'll always have a level of face-to-face interaction and customers needing or wanting to interact with us through those ways. But hopefully that will be reduced to minimum because people will learn how to use the digital channels and interact with us with time through those. We'll then move to level 1, which is the main channel shift that we want to achieve, and that will be supported through the technology. So that's very much driving customers to online, using the digital channels on the go when it suits them, whether that's after work or whenever they've got time to interact with us through the means that they want. And hopefully we'll be able to achieve that quite easily coming forward. Level 2 is all about consolidated contact center. There's 2 things to it. There's one which is consolidation piece, which is already underway, and that is very much around bringing in all of the contacts centrally to a hub where we can standardize the provision, ensure that it's consistent and it's just as good in the central contact center as well as in service at the service level. But what we want to achieve is introduction of an omni-channel, so all of the technology that will underpin and enable better contact handling. And finally, there will be a handoff, a moment where contact center agents will not be able to help any further because there is a specialist or professional advice that is required. And at that point, it will be handed over to services to take over and deliver remaining element of the process, such as assessments in social care. That is the principle of the new operating model. It will be enabled and underpinned by new technologies, which I will touch on in the next slide. What you've got in front of you is a list of steps that we want to take to deliver on that operating model, as well as on that digital strategy that I've mentioned earlier. I've mentioned we've got already CRM and voice automation underway, and those are the two pieces of technology that will enable us to deliver on some of the elements that I've mentioned in the operating model, such as access to data and transparency, because it's really, really important to have that central view, and without technologies such as CRM, we'll never be able to achieve that. But what we're also looking to do is modernization of the council at as little cost as possible, so that it's affordable and sustainable, whilst we're modernizing and innovating, providing all of the services that other local authorities have already done or are able to do for their end users. And move to cloud is one of the things we are considering where possible, as well as CRM, better use of data, predictive analytics, use of technology such as AI. We've got a first pilot planned out and mobilized in adult social care space. We already have got robotic process automation to automate our processes, enable much more efficient ways of delivering council services. Customer centricity I touched on. Agility is another really important one. It's not just the way we work, but it's also providing the technology to enable our officers to work in a much more flexible and agile ways. So what that means is if we provide them with mobile technology on any handheld devices, they'll be able to do what we employ them to do, so help our residents, instead of having to come back to office and rekey the information that they've taken during the meetings during the assessment or license visits or any other purposes that they served. There is a lot of technology that we're planning to bring in, and I will touch on in a moment on that. But technology investments, I think, is something that we all have to bear in mind. It has to be centralized function. We have to look at technology choices that are right for the council with the wider context of the enterprise architecture and the technology stack that we already have in-house. So sweating our assets, making sure that we're utilizing the technology we already have. Are we not duplicating? Are we consolidating technology to make sure that we reduce the costs, because there is duplication when it comes to technology that we already have in-house. And if we don't centralize the purchasing side of technology, procurement side of things, then we'll end up with multiple solutions delivering exactly the same functionality across multiple services, which will only raise costs not only in technology but also in resourcing, because somebody's got to support it and maintain it. So it's really important that we centralize that function, got oversight of technology investments as well as return on that investment. Saying all that, there's a lot of projects already underway. Within the 4 months since I've been here, we have achieved a lot, and there's a lot more planned for the next 12 months. CRM I've mentioned, we are in very early stages with trying to understand how we actually want to use CRM. There's no point us going to the market and having conversation with suppliers if as an organization we don't understand what is our strategy when it comes to CRM and how we want to use it, so that we can maximize the solution that we bring in and get the best price for it. So we are in the early stages engaging with each service area to understand their requirements, so that we can roll out the minimum viable product initially and then build on it through continuous improvement. Website design and content, really important if we want to drive the channel shift. And I say that because we can implement new forms and we can implement automation, but if we don't have a good content on our website, and if we can't enable those integrations between forms, online content, and back-of-line systems, then that automation will be very poor and very limited. And very often, lack of content on the website, lack of information about council services drives the contact to the contact center. So it's really important that we start with basics such as review of our website and improve where we can. And that then leads us to those forms and portals. There's consolidation piece of work that needs to be done around those as well, because we use multiple suppliers for both forms and portals, which not only drives costs, but also limits the customer experience and provides actually poor customer experience, because as a resident, if I have to log into housing portal with a different username and different password, and then log into my council tax account and different one to pay my parking permit, then who remembers all of those password logins? It's just not really good, seamless customer experience. So reviewing number of portals, forms, and other technology provision that we have is going to be really keen, not only to reduce the cost, but also to improve the customer experience. So all of that is already in place, as well as some of the smaller initiatives to drive the momentum and keep the excitement and just demonstrate the value of technology and what it can do for end users as well as the organization itself. I know that digital exclusion is an important topic to members, so I've prepared 2 slides on some statistics just to prove the point that Thurrock is actually ready for digital transformation, and people not only have got the skills but access to digital means of interacting with the organization. So that should never be seen as an obstacle or blocker to transformation for the council. I'm not going to go through it, it's fairly self-explanatory, but the stats are showing that our residents are ready for digitalization. But there's also technology for those that, for example, can't speak the language. There's also technology that will enable them to interact with council services using their native language. And I've listed a few risks such as cultural change, such as investment, such as change fatigue, which is going to be really important because there's a lot to be done for Thurrock and with Thurrock staff, but the amount of change needs to be reasonable and spread across number of years to enable a really good adoption rates. So in a nutshell, that is what we've been doing over the last few months. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Marta, for that. That was a very detailed presentation, so thank you. Any questions, Councillor Howden?
Thank you, Chair. I apologise I was late. Under the design principles, number 5, data-led, you're talking about the predictive use of data. Obviously, that's got massive applications in social care, to a degree in housing repair. What are we doing about growing our internal capacity to actually manage that? Because there are lots of AI applications, especially in the health service, and frankly, they're not producing the type of predictive work that we would expect. And it's by and large down to having people who are experts in the service area trying to become experts in the data field, which very, very rarely is actually possible.
Really good point. Data should and will need to play a much more important role in decision making, driving the technology choices and how we run council services. As an organisation, we're not quite ready for predictive analytics. Not only we haven't got access to data, the quality of data is not quite there yet either, and we need technology such as CRM to get a much better visibility of that data in the first place, which we're already making steps towards. We do need capability in terms of data, so we need to bring in data analysts, we need to bring in data architects, we need to bring in data engineers to make sure that we can actually use data that we've got access to. There is a consolidation work being done on in performance and data analytics space, but that is very much about use of data that we already have got access to inform future interventions. But there's a lot of technology that can be used to drive those interventions, and mold is one of the interesting areas, and an easy example to describe. If you implement technology inside people's homes to monitor the temperature, the humidity, and combine it with information on poverty, on social and economic situation of a household, then you can very much predict where your mold problems will arise. What you can also then do is look at the history of where you've had mold interventions and you can take a different course of action to how you tackle those problems. Because if you know that there has been a problem, if you know that there is a high temperature or low temperature and high humidity levels, and the background of the family is what it is in terms of socioeconomic situation, then you know that the mold is going to arise. But if it's reoccurring, then instead of taking a small fixes, you do the job properly first, which will cost you a little bit more upfront, but in the long run, you're going to spend a lot less because you're taking less interactions. But as you said, you need the skill set to know how to join different pieces of information together to give you the full story and an answer to the solution that you want to take, which we haven't got quite yet, but we're on a good track.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. That's really encouraging that we're basically not trying to bodge it ourselves and we're bringing in the expertise. You mentioned the AI tool in social care. I wonder, have you looked into trying to piggyback off of what the NHS are trying to do? They've got predictive models between GP care, trying to keep people out of A&E, which by and large is just upscaled versions of the liquid logic system that most local authorities use. So have you looked into how we can try and perhaps bandwagon onto the data analytics work they are doing to get the same predictive model in social care for us?
Not yet is an honest answer. There's a lot to be done in each service area, and going back to my point about change adoption and people being ready for the change and how much change as an organization we can adopt at once is going to be really important. There is a lot we're already doing. I'm not saying this isn't important because it is, but I've only been here for 5 minutes. So it is on my radar, and we've been having some conversation with public health around use of data and predictive analytics, and they're very much interested in that space, but bear with me.
Very realistic. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that. There's two things that now occur to me. The first thing was, you've talked about putting the customer at the core, at the centre of this technology, and it very much has to be the case, because at the end of the day, the technology has to adapt to the customer rather than the other way around. But how are you in practice doing that? How are you mapping out what our customers have to do and how we can actually improve that through technology?
So what we have done in the past months is use of service designers, user researchers, mapping the customer journeys, understanding how customers are right now interacting with council services, what are the pain points, and how they want to interact with us going forward, instead of predefining the technology. So traditionally what you would do is, there is a problem, that's your piece of technology, without really understanding whether the specific community can use that piece of technology and whether it will address their problem. So we're trying to understand what is the problem area rather than solutionize it up front. And only then we design the future processes and the customer journeys. And if you engage the customer not just at the front by understanding who they are, how they interact, how many interaction points they've got with different council services. Most often if there is a customer who've got housing needs, they will also have benefits, they will also have access to social. And so it's a multiple problem, but most often than not. And it's really important to understand all of the touch points and how they interact and how they want to interact. What is the problem and what's preventing them from interacting with us in the way that we need them to interact with us. And only then choosing the technology choices to address their problems.
Thanks. And I mean, I can imagine you can get a lot of that information through workflow analysis, through data analysis. This may be a stupid question. Are you talking to customers?
We are talking to customers. I think the beauty of Thurrock is that 60% of workforce is actually local residents as well. So it's much easier job than it is for other local authorities because you've got direct access to residents. I don't think there's going to be any, well, it's not a secret. We are reviewing our IT and we will try to move into digital services rather than a traditional IT shop. And what that will mean is that we'll bring in the skills and capabilities that will enable us to interact with our residents more. So right now we've got to rely on external service designers, but what we want to do going forward is have our own internal team permanently, so that we can build forums and build on that momentum and make sure that we always have access to customer feedback and build that into.
Okay, that sounds really good. The downer, I guess I'm going to have to ask. You mentioned in response to Councillor Holden that you're looking to bring in the skills, and you do need specialist skills to do the actual digital transformation process. Those skills don't come cheap. How much leeway do you have within your budget
I don't.
to bring in what you need?
I don't. That's the simple answer. More complex answer. The review will be unconventional. So I've got a team of 50 just within IT. There's customer experience team as well. But it doesn't mean that that team is what the organization needs, because what we've got right now is a skill set that is suited for traditional infrastructure, so the on-premise. If we move to cloud, I don't need infrastructure officers. I will need cloud officers. So we can either choose to upskill or replace with the new skill set. So what I'm not suggesting is that I will bring in additional 50 officers within IT function. What we're going to do is look at how much of the old technology we've got to keep whilst we're transitioning to a modern organization and modern technologies. How many resources we need additionally or instead of existing ones, so that we can support the new technologies that we're bringing in and all of the exciting AI type of initiatives that we're talking about, and what are the capabilities that we need to bring in on top of it. And yes, they're not cheap, you're right, and I am a firm believer that you get what you pay for, but it might be a smaller but more capable team going forward. And as we bring in new technologies, we'll be building business cases for each piece of technology and each initiative that we implement. And that business case will be robust enough to include the costs of additional resources that we might need to deliver on that technology. But what that will mean is that we will not just talk about the cost of resource to implement a piece of technology, but also what is the return on investment. And we'll build the cost-benefit analysis within each business case. So we might end up, there will be a number of different options, and I don't know what the options will be. That we have a small core but more capable team that is a permanent team with access to business cases funding. It might be that we but that is very short-sighted and very short-term tactical saving. You might want to go for a long-term saving option, which is to have a bigger permanent team, which initially might look like a growth and additional cost, but long-term it's a saving. Because if you think about funding business cases with external resources, it is costing a lot more than a permanent team. So in that, if you look at a long-term picture, it might be more viable to look at a bigger IT team on a permanent basis, but at a lower cost per resource. And you might want to consider other options. So I don't have the answer, but there will be options in terms of how we bringing in that skill set.
Thank you.
Councillor Fox, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. Will there be digital assistance available to residents, we'll say, in the libraries?
Yes, there already is support to help people go online and transact online if that's what they want to do. What we want to do is increase that support as we implement it, and I don't mean necessarily in increasing number of resources, but increasing the support that they get from the resources that are already available there. So if they come and say, I need to apply for a service, the library assistants or digital assistants that are available in libraries right now will be able to guide them through the process, do it with them, show them step by step so that they can do it next time themselves, if that makes sense, without necessarily having to come to library. But if they haven't got access to Wi-Fi or PC, they can still use that service. So yes.
And the second question is, what is the location of the 3 internet clubs?
I will have to take that away and come back to you on location of those clubs, if that's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Poston and Councillor Memoir.
Thank you. We've said a lot about being data driven and having feedback from the residents as customers. I'm assuming that all of that data is through residents that are already using our services. So in terms of any residents that there are that struggle to use our services and so just don't, or do it through family members or neighbours on their behalf, what are we doing to kind of combat that and reach out to residents who just don't use us because they don't have access to us or they struggle to interact with the council as a whole? Is there anything that we can do or we are doing to ensure that everyone in Thurrock can communicate with the council effectively?
Yes, I think I've already touched on this. So libraries is a prime example where people are getting not only access to digital channels through use of PC, through access to Wi-Fi, but also digital support officers that are already there. And that offer will increase. What other local authorities are doing really successfully is rolling out training for residents as well as internal staff actually, which is really important so that they know how to support the residents really well. As the stats are suggesting, there's a very high proportion of local community who've got access to internet, use it on a daily basis and can interact. There's also technology that enables them to, so if a language is a barrier, although from the stats that are included within the slide deck, it's quite clear that 88%, which is quite high proportion, can speak language, English language. But there is AI technology that will enable you to interact through the call or online in your own language. So Romanian, Polish are, I think, 2 main foreign languages spoken within the borough. And there's AI technology that you can apply to the website as well as the phone lines that enables you to get the information that you want in your own language. What can also be done is if there is an assessment done with a social worker or housing officer on housing assessment needs, the forms that people have got to populate can also be accessed in their own language. So there's a training that we will need to roll out. There's technology that we can implement at a fairly low cost. And there's already a provision within library and community hubs that is available to people. But there's always more that we can do.
My question's kind of related to what Councillor Polston has said and Councillor Fox, and it is to do with the delivery of the service. Because I do acknowledge that in this report it does talk about digital exclusion and wanting to like prevent that from happening or at least mitigate some of the circumstances. And you have also like reviewed the current improvements that could be made potentially to the website, which is something that's really good. And also the translation services is really interesting as well. But in terms of actually wanting to integrate the service into the local community, because we've been told that over and over again, but at least I'll speak on behalf of my ward, our library is open 3 days a week. The hours are very, very limited. And so although the statistics do suggest that the majority of people, they've got broadband, internet connections, everything's fine, but that small percentage that don't, in people terms, that's quite a lot of people. So in terms of the impact that they're going to feel, considering the fact that they also they have limited access to places like libraries and community hubs, at least in my ward, there isn't really, apart from the library, there's not much else that people can really go to. Are there any sort of ideas or suggestions that have been made or could be made that would account for those people at least? Because I think that we don't want people to be left behind in this sort of like digital revolution. And as much as I am like a young person and technology is great and I understand it, but I can really appreciate there are a lot of people who either don't really know how to use it or they just can't afford to, you know, have access to certain devices, technology, fast broadband even. So I'm just interested in knowing, for the small percentage of people who don't have that access, what can be done to sort of help them, especially if resources aren't going to be expanded as we've been told over and over again. How do you kind of reconcile those two things?
Yeah. We'll be putting together a plan to tackle the digital exclusion for sure. So I'm not going to give you all the answers now, and we are in a very early stages of digital transformation ourselves. So I think it will have to go hand in hand with delivery of those digital solutions that we're rolling out. But I think the most important bit will be to understand what is preventing people from interacting. As you said, it's a very small proportion of people, but in terms of number of people, it might be quite high. So we need to understand what is preventing them from interacting with council through the digital means, whether that's poverty, whether that's skills, whether that's language, because you'll have different interventions depending on what the root cause is. So once we understand why people don't or choose not to interact with us through the digital means, we can decide what is the best course of action, and there will be things that we can do for them. But what you've got to remember is that the channel shift will never achieve 100%. We will never be able to attract 100% of local communities to use the digital means, and for those, we'll have to still provide the traditional ways of interacting. So we're not planning to shut down our contact centres and cut off the lines or prevent them from coming to office and having that face-to-face interaction. We'll always have to provide and make sure that there is a small provision for those that can't or choose not to. But for those that are willing, and I think there is a lot of will there, we'll need to understand why they currently choosing not to, because it might be that the content on our website is so bad, or the particular form that they're using is actually just a form, but if I want to complete the form and then make a payment, I still have to call the contact center, and that is because we haven't got the payment. So at some point they still have to call, and we're not able to complete the journey totally digitally. So we've got to understand at our end and their end what is the blocker, so that we can design the actions around it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good answer, and I hope that it's really exciting, I think, everything that's going to be brought in, but just in my head, it's just thinking about those people that maybe will be left behind. And as you said, it's inevitable that maybe some people just won't really want to interact and just want that face-to-face service. But it's kind of worrying when you look at, and it might not, it's not necessarily your problem as per se, but in terms of the limited resources that we have, and wanting to deliver things to communities, but then not having the spaces to do that delivery. I think that's a problem. Like, how do you reconcile those two things? I don't understand it really, but thank you for your answer.
Any other questions? Okay, just a couple of questions from me. You can have, you know, the best system in the world, but it's only as good as the people who are processing the information, processing the inquiries. Perhaps one of the reasons people don't engage, I hear from far too many of my constituents who do use the portal at the moment to raise issues. There's the issue of making services easier, but then there's people who raise an inquiry. They want an answer to a question. And even up until about 2 weeks ago, I'm hearing from far too many residents who raise the inquiry, and that's as far as it goes. They hear diddly squat back. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. And we can have the best system in the world with whistles and bells and all sorts, but if you've got officers who just ignore, and I'm going to use that word, ignore inquiries that are allocated to them, or give quite contemptuous one-line answers, well, we've wasted our money, haven't we? So, an early stage, I appreciate that, but how are we going to improve that quality of response, and how are we going to ensure that when people do raise an inquiry, it isn't just ignored? What processes are in place to improve that? Because if that doesn't happen, this fails, in my view.
No, you're right. There's a technology and there's people side of change. But we are reviewing the way we're handling contacts right now, and that goes back to the consolidation piece. So what we're doing right now is reviewing where we've got contact handling resources across each service area. So we've got the main contact center, we've got Thurrock first, but then we've got people within each service area taking calls, responding to emails and online queries that you're referring to. What we're going to do is centralize the simple queries. So those that are coming through online, asking for a service or complaining and expecting the response. All of that will be consolidated into a central function where those simple inquiries can be handled in a standardized way. There's a bit to be done also on standardization, making sure that the quality of that response and the way the contact is being handled is standardized and consolidated across the organization. But there's also a bit that we can do on technology to making sure that the inquiries are not closed manually by the officer without actually having response and taken through each step of the process within the system itself. So I think it's a two-way process that we'll have to tackle, and that is already underway.
Thank you. And one final question from me. When I saw this item on our work programme weeks ago, I'd be lying if I said when we got to this point, I was expecting a bit more meat on the bones. It is clear that this is very early stages. When will we start seeing a bit more meat on the bones? When will we get some idea, a timescale for when we're actually going to see what this looks like? I understand it's going to happen in stages. It's not just going to land as one. But when will we start to see? At the minute, there's lots of ideas, lots of things we can do, could do. When are we going to have something that says this is what it's going to look like and this is how it's going to work?
So the program of work with clear scope and timelines against it? That's no problem. We already delivering some of the initiatives such as direct debits, such as the AI pilot with adult social care, as well as the bigger ticket items such as voice automation and CRM. There's also work being done on defining further technology choices and projects that will come with it. But what we can do is present the plan on page as it's developing. So what we already have in train, what we're already considering, as everything else will come with it with time. So it will be evolving product if that's good enough. But we can definitely provide an update with, as you call it, more meat on the bone in terms of what we're already doing and what is in train and what are the considerations on the table.
Thank you. And presumably, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here.
No?
This is something that councils across the country are doing and have been doing for a very long time. We want something that works for us, I get that, but to what extent are we looking? I mean, Councillor Howden touched on this in terms of other public authorities. What are we doing to look at best practice at other councils and lift those bits and learn as we go on our own journey?
A lot, actually.
Good, let's hear it.
You're right. We shouldn't waste time and money on trying to reinvent the wheel because every single local authority is in exactly the same situation. Ever since I started working in public sector, there were savings to be made for every single local authority. And every single local authority is trying to implement technology that will implement more efficient ways of delivering council services. And there's wealthier and more mature organizations who have already tried and tested, failed or succeeded. And we haven't got the luxury of time or money to test and fail and implement new technologies. So we have spent the whole summer on talking to other local authorities about their transformation journeys, what technologies they have implemented, how much it cost them, what savings they have delivered as a result, what they have learned from it, the good and the bad. And we have also rolled out at the back of these conversations a series of digital bite-sized sessions for all staff, inviting other local authorities to come and talk to us about some of the technologies that they have implemented, not only to showcase the stuff that is being done elsewhere and the best practice that comes with it, but also to create that excitement across the organization and prep them for what's coming, and give people opportunity to understand what it actually looks like for the end user, i.e. the local authority. And we have done it purposely with other local authorities and not the supplier, so that it didn't sound like a sales pitch and us trying to sell them something, but actually talking to local authorities, to those that are using the technologies day in and day out, so that they can see what works, what doesn't, and what might or might not work for Thurrock. Because what worked for others might not necessarily work for us.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? No. Thank you, Marta. I think we've done that one to death. That's really helpful. Thank you. Apologies. Next item, item 7, is a question and answer session on the members' inquiry process. Can you take us through the report first of all? I know it's a question and answer session, but could you just talk us through the report that we've got in front of us?
Thank you, Chair. I've done a quick overview that I'm going to talk through anyway, so hopefully that will be okay for you. So, hello everyone. Just to sort of set the scene, at the last Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 30th of July, the committee requested that the current members' inquiries process was reviewed so that there was a focus on service improvement for members. So this included the possibility of resolving queries rather than service requests in a more informal and timely manner, looking at the tone of replies that you sometimes get from services which you believe could sometimes damage member and officer relationships, and also looking at how other local authorities manage their members' inquiries. So the complaints team oversee the current process, but they're not responsible for actually answering the inquiries. So they're just the middleman, basically. They log the inquiries onto the complaint system, but the actual services do the replies directly to the members. The complaints team has recently moved under my operational management within customer services, and since it's moved, I've actually been reviewing some of the processes within the team for complaints, FOIs, SARS, members' inquiries, and I do agree with you. The current processes are actually very outdated. They're very manual, and there definitely is scope for improvement. So it's actually very timely that you've mentioned this, because the service has just moved into our area, and it's something that we wanted to focus on anyway. So we've taken some immediate action already. We've purchased a system to replace the current Respond logging system, and we're in the process of implementing this for complaints, FOIs and subject access requests, and members' inquiries case logging, so it's more automated. It will do things like it will automatically chase responses that become due, provide much better reporting, and lots of other features that will benefit the complaints team, who are acting as the middleman automating this stuff. That's more focused on the actual logging and monitoring of complaints, but I still believe that the actual process that you guys have got for logging your members' inquiries is very long-winded. You're basically emailing an email box. The team then have to copy that information into the current response system. So it's duplicating effort. When they get a response back, they've then got to update the system with the response, and it just doesn't appear to be a very streamlined process to me. So it could definitely do with a refresh and further automation. And as I said, it's very timely that you brought this up at the last ONS session. So the purpose of the session today is really to start that engagement with you. Hopefully the briefing note did provide some background detail ahead of the engagement. So just to sum up really, really quickly, the current process: you email members' inquiries on behalf of residents as part of your casework, saying what you want and why you're requesting it. It's then logged separately on a complaint system, currently Respond, but that's changing to information any time. An acknowledgement will get sent to you within 48 hours, and then you'll get a full response to the inquiry within 10 working days. If the response is unable to be provided, then you'll get an update saying as to why that is. The officers send their inquiry directly to yourselves, and then it's your responsibility to inform the resident of the outcome of the inquiry. There's also a separate process where you can email general inquiries at Thurrock. And that's really for an initial request for a service such as mist bin, wheelie bin replacement or something like that. So I've done a bit of analysis so far. The volumes of members' inquiries are currently about 106 emails per week go from yourselves into the members' inquiry email box. For 23-24, there was a total of 4,048 members' inquiry received, and there was a 94% of those were answered within the time frame of 10 working days and an average response time of 5 days. Very similar for the previous year, 4,142, 94% in time frame, and the average response time, again, was 5 days. Now, I asked one of my team, an independent person from outside the complaints team, to do some evaluation of some of those members' inquiries emails. What we found was that 7 were replies to previous inquiries. We did 33 just in a 3-hour period that came into the box. 7 were about previous inquiries, but several of them, and the majority of them, were relating to initial first-time requests. So the members' inquiries process is being used for initial requests such as overflowing litter bins, weeds and overgrowth, highways, that type of thing. So that was very apparent. So, you know, the point that you raised at the previous ONS, that it is being used for things that could be resolved much more quickly rather than waiting for responses through that process. So what next? The high-level process was shown on the background paper. It is clear to see it's a very manual process, definite room for improvement. We're currently in the process of implementing information, which is a new system that we've purchased. It's very low cost, but it's a much more enhanced system than the current response system that we've got. We've got no further payments to make on the response system. That contract will naturally run its course next year, and we've previously paid the final payment on that. So we're not running 2 systems at the same time with additional costs. We're going to start off with FOIs and subject access requests mid-October, followed by complaints, and then we'll do the members' inquiry login. But that bit is just the bit that the complaints team are actually logging on your behalf. We want to make sure it's right with the other areas before we then roll it out to members. We've conducted a lot of benchmarking already since the service moved into customer service. We've only got 10 responses so far from other local authorities, but we're waiting some information from others, and we've chased all that data. We really want to get a good sample from this because we really think we can make improvements to the current process that you've got, but as you've all sort of articulated before, there's lots of councils that do this already, so let's check in with them and see if we can come up with a really good solution for you. It was very interesting to see that most of the councils do use digital solutions, but they also have email as an option, all except one council, which was Croydon Council, and interestingly enough, they also use information which we have just purchased. And what we do know is that there is a members app within the system that we've just purchased, which Croydon are using to enable members to actually log their inquiries directly onto the app. So it eliminates all this double handling, it gives better tracking, etc. So we do have the option to actually use this app, however, at no additional cost as well, which is really good because it's just something that comes with the information package that we've got. But what we'd like to do first is actually speak to Croydon, find out how that's working for them, get a bit more background information, because they might be having issues with it. We don't know at this stage. So our primary focus is obviously to engage with you before deciding on any final solution, and we want to be fully aware of any issues that they've had with it. So from our perspective, our preferred way forward would be to engage with a group of members and try and come up with an appropriate process going forward that does modernise, automate and improve the quality and timeliness of your responses. We could then supply all of the feedback that we get from the full benchmarking and also the update from Croydon when we speak to them about the use of the information app. We have been made aware that there was a previous group that were looking at members' inquiries last year. We only found out a few days ago because obviously this is new into our service. And I think that group, the actions or the discussion they had was put on hold because of the new contact management business case and developments, and the fact that obviously we were getting our new lovely chief digital officer and we would be looking at all different solutions like CRM, etc. So that was put on hold. I have managed to get the feedback from that group because I think it's really important that we don't waste the effort that was already put into that, so we can also utilise that feedback as well. And it may just be that only 1 or 2 meetings are required. I'm aware there's lots of other task and finish groups and things going on, so we don't want to, you know, put a lot of demand on members to do that, but I think it's a really important piece of work, and I'm really keen, now it's come under my service, to actually get that right for you. I'm confident that if we do this work, we can actually come up with a really concise action plan to improve the processes for you. And I've looked at some of the things that the previous group actually said. Some of it was about how do you identify complaints as opposed to it being a members' inquiry. Well, there's some really good stuff on information that I've seen where you can automatically switch it into a complaint on the system. It's much more advanced than the current response system that we've got. Logging, allocating to service areas, chasing. The chasing will be totally automated on information. You know, follow-up tasks, how will they be identified, reporting. So it's all the stuff I would expect to see. And I really don't think it will take a lot for us to get a group together, look at the stuff we've now got with information and make some quick improvements for you. I do know who the previous attendees were, and you know, that's entirely up to you, if you think that that's a good way to move forward, whether you keep the same group or whether you have some different members on there. And they were working with our IT head of service, Andy Best, and also the previous head of service, Lee Henley. So obviously the world's changed a lot. We're embarking on our voice automation CRM journey. There's lots of other digital innovations going on in the council, like robotic process automation. And it may be that we can combine some of those elements to actually come up with a really good solution for you. As well as that, I would like to actually put a really high focus on the quality of some of the responses you get. And I will instruct some of my team, and I will also do some myself, to do sampling of quality of responses, because I think it's really important that if you have got issues with that, then we are feeding that back to those services. You know, there's no excuse for getting a bad-toned email, or you're doing your job on behalf of our residents and you deserve to get a quality response. So, you know, I will take ownership of that and work with the services to try and make improvements there. And also timeliness. I mean, it is 94% response in timescales, but there's still some that aren't getting resolved in timescales. So again, that's something I can tackle easily because we can monitor that. I've already asked one of my managers to start chasing the minute we see things are outstanding to try and speed that up for you. So some of the things I can take on board immediately and start working on those for you. And if you do have examples of where you believe that the service has fallen short from officers within the council, then I'm more than happy for you to send those to me so that I can follow up with those services, because it's really important that we get the quality of response for you. So it really is just opening up for questions, your suggestions, whether you're happy to move forward in the way that we've suggested, any comments you've got, and we can obviously take that away and see what we can do to make this process better for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tracy. That was quite an in-depth process. But, Chair, I wanted to bring forward that where Tracy's brought for about not a task and finish group, a few of us coming together, I think we should be taking that forward, because we're not going to get a solution here tonight. This is going to be a really in-depth piece of work. I think it's an important piece of work to improve the inquiry process, expect 4 members. So what can we do, Chair, to bring that forward and start that, get the ball rolling on getting a group together?
Thank you. I completely agree. I was surprised to hear that there was a members group, working group. I mean, right, that's where it's at. I was going to ask where it's at, but okay, that answers my question. I agree. I think that's something we should definitely do. I suppose we look to you to advise us how we can do that. Does it sit here? Does it sit with the Constitution Working Group? How can we get that moving?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can link in with Lucy and Claire to determine the best way possible to do that. Happy to, take ownership of getting that sorted and move forward with that at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Memoir?
Not so much a question, but thank you for your report, because I think I've been doing this for a year and a bit, and my experience of members' inquiries, if I'm being honest, it hasn't been particularly great in terms of like the response times and like how it can seem quite tedious to kind of write an email and then you're waiting the recommended amount of time, then you don't hear anything back, and then you have to remember to chase that up, and there's nothing to remind you to chase that up. So at one point I was considering, do I need to make like an Excel spreadsheet so that I can just keep a track on everything? And like it's a lot, and considering being a counsellor as like a part-time role, me personally, I'm a student, so to make this as efficient as possible would be the ideal goal. So I think the fact that you've come and you've kind of acknowledged the shortcomings and that you're willing to improve it is really exciting. And I think I'm happy to sit and see ways that we can improve the service, because at the end of the day, if there's a way that we can use technology to keep track on maybe casework that's maybe gone on for too long, I think it'd just be really, really helpful for all members. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for coming here and being willing to improve the service.
You're welcome, and yeah, it'd be really great to have you on the group to look at that, especially if you have been experiencing issues personally. So yeah, make sure you're included on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just say before I bring Councillor Fletcher in, it is, I suppose, a step in the right direction to hear you acknowledging some of the problems. I think in the past there's always been a defensive approach. So when you raise a complaint about the process, previous officers have kind of excused, defended, and sort of nothing to see here kind of approach. So it's at least a step in the right direction that we're hearing you say that yes, there is room for improvement. Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair. I really just wanted to say that, I'm in my second stint as a councillor, and so far, since May, I have found the members' inquiries performance brilliant. I'll be honest. I'm not having to chase anything up. I'm getting results very quickly, and fantastic. And the reason I say that is I'm not sure it's necessarily just down to the technology. At the end of the day, behind the technology, there's a human interaction. And I'm probably dealing with a lot of the same people, and I'm finding that they are very good at getting back to me. So I think you could improve the technology, and you would still have a bit of a delta between some departments and others. Where I would say and I've not had recourse to it, not had reason to go to it this time round, but last time I was a councillor, where I did find a lot of frustration was the complaints process, which, and I will say felt like, I'm not saying it was, but it very often felt like departments marking their own homework. And just sort of, on a factual level, what you tended to get was a you said, we said, you did, we did, we did, we did, a kind of a relisting of the stuff you frankly know already because you were there, with no real attempt to say, well, okay, what worked, what didn't, and what will we do about it? So I think, again, it's less about the technology, and it's more about getting a better understanding, officers getting a better understanding when we complain, what we're looking for and how to deliver it. And it is not a regurgitation of what's happened to date. It is, well, okay, you say this hasn't worked well. Here's our view of it, but okay, if it hasn't worked well, how can we improve it? I mean, to echo the chair, there has been in the past a sort of a feeling of defensiveness, but actually when it comes down to it, it's maybe just a question of process. If the process is complaint comes in and the officer concerned needs to, is being asked to say, okay, what went wrong, how can we improve it in the future? Rather than what went wrong and how can we say it didn't, then that would be quite useful. And again, just to emphasize, it's not necessarily a technological problem, it is a human problem, it is a cultural problem, and you can't fix the one without the other.
I totally agree with you, and I suppose I can say, because I've only just got the department, so I don't feel defensive in any way about what's happened previously, because it's only just come to me. So I can look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. And within the customer services department already, we do an awful lot of quality checking. We quality check calls, we quality check emails, and bringing that within the service, we will standardise that as well. And I agree with you, there's a lot of things, like, for example, somebody might complain about the waste collection policy changing. Well, then that's going to a service. They're going to the service, they're then writing a response when we already know that that's a policy change and that's not going to change. So there's things like that that we've picked up already that can be improved, they're wasting officers' time. And I do agree with you, some of the responses are very defensive rather than just getting to the root cause of the problem. So as part of the quality checking, I've already assigned one of my team who does some of the quality checking across customer services to start analysing some of the complaint responses as well. So totally agree with what you're saying, and it is something that's high on our agenda already. So hopefully over the next few months you will start to see improvements in that area. And again, we can't do everything immediately. We're busy with the new system implementation at the moment, but certainly over the next few months I think you will start to see an improvement.
Lovely, thank you.
Councillor Polston and then Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying that I've only been a member for 4 months, so I feel like I'm relatively well placed to say that I'm one of the closest to being trained in this. I've conferred with my colleague on my left here. I've never heard of the general inquiries inbox. I don't know if that's something other councillors have. But that's the first time I've heard of it, is in this report. So it would have been nice to maybe know that there was an alternative avenue beforehand. But I suppose my question rather is, I feel like there's been at least in my experience, an over tendency to run an inquiry through the complaints process, especially little things. So I've had, obviously with the new rollout of the food caddies and stuff, there's been lots of miscollections, and I've had numerous miscollections being run as complaints. Well, they're not complaints. And I was just wondering how at the moment do we categorise what is and isn't a complaint, and why do we have so much that's possibly going to the wrong way?
That is totally one of the things that I want to look at, because the initial analysis that we did, just one of my independent team members doing a 3-hour stint, most of those things were basic service requests, first-time service requests, which in reality, if they're coming to you as a member, then really that customer should be either logging that themselves, using the online services, or if they're digitally excluded, actually calling to deal with that inquiry rather than the member having to deal with that on their behalf. Now, if that's happened, if they've already done that and it's not happened, that's totally different. Then obviously you would expect that to be dealt with by the member. But this is one of the things that we wanted to discuss with any group representatives, because people might have a different interpretation of what the member's role is in relation to that. And it would be good to discuss that and define how we do that, because, you know, 106 members' inquiries a week is a lot of inquiries, and then you're then waiting sometimes 10 days for a response to something that's just a basic logging inquiry. But I do accept that you have a responsibility to the residents, so it's something that, you know, we do need to discuss about the best way forward for that and agree a uniform approach to that. So,
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's encouraging, as with the previous presentation, to see that, you know, council's looking at its failings and trying to act and improve. You know, it's a thing realistically we really do need. And thank you, Tracy, for your in-depth presentation. I wonder if there's a way in which you can cut that time frame, that 10 days down in certain subjects, because realistically, I mean, it's my second stint as a councillor, and I've got to be honest, the system hasn't improved in my estimation. I mean, I've got sometimes keep chasing things up. You know, my workload is reasonably heavy, and I'm finding, actually, I do the manual bit. I actually write it down in the book sometimes, and the date that I posted the email, you know, issued to yourselves. But I was just wondering if certain things could be cut down rather than waiting for the 10 days. You can't always keep thinking, oh, we've got that time frame, we're safe now before we get back to you. You know, I think before it might have even been less, I don't know. There was a less of a time frame, but maybe to look at that for certain things, for sure. That's ongoing things like bins and things like that, you know. Because the residents, they're on to us straight away, you know, what's happening with this, you know. Quite understand them as well. Thank you.
sure, I agree, and I think if we have a group and we can talk about those things as well. I mean, the average response time is 5 days. That was last year and the year before. So it's rare that it is sort of the full 10 days. But yeah, I totally agree. I think it really does need a fresh look at the whole thing, because it's working for some people, but I think it's probably fair to say that for the majority of people, there are some issues with it. So I think a totally fresh look and see what we can do, and if there's some quick things that we can do, or if those can just be logged as quick service requests, and then as long as you get the update, and I know on information you can switch it from being a member's inquiry to an immediate service request, and you'll still get the update through the system. So I think there is a lot that we can do, but I'd like to sort of get a feel for what all of the issues are and then see what we can do to help you with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cecil and Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. Yes, it's when the resident isn't satisfied, either with your actions or the actions of the officer. So we need not to forget that, and we need to be aware of our unhappy residents and how we've handled it and the answer. They don't like the answer. So we've got to pick that up, unhappy residents.
Yeah, sure. And also, it may be that that member's inquiry is actually a genuine complaint that then needs to go through the complaints process. And again, I know with the new system, you can switch the inquiry immediately to a complaint. So there are a lot of benefits with it. I'm not an expert in it at the moment because we haven't actually got it up and running yet. But what I've seen in demos, etc., it's got a lot more features than we've currently got with Respond to enable us to tackle some of those issues for you. So, yeah, you know, I'm really excited to get a group going, and because I genuinely believe there are some sort of quick wins that we can make for you on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. It sounds like there may be a slight divergence of understanding between maybe how we see the purpose of a members' inquiry and how you see it. And I thought I might just be talking for myself, but I think John's saying the same thing. I do occasionally get requests which possibly the individual could put through themselves. But the majority of the requests I get for me to act, okay, so the stuff that I send through to members' inquiries, are where, exactly as John says, the whatever interaction they've already had with the council hasn't worked for them. So we're that second stage. It's not a complaint, and I think perhaps that's one thing we could probably agree on straight off. A members' inquiry and a complaint are two different things. And so it's not that. What it is somebody saying, I haven't been able to get what I need to get, or even to understand what I'm supposed to be getting through dealing with the normal channels. Can you help me? And frankly, that's a fundamental of our role. So for me, yes, it might look like a service request to you. The reason it's coming through from me is because the person who's asked me to do it, in the vast majority of cases, isn't sure how to use the normal channels, or has used the normal channels and they've not worked for whatever reason. No fault, but the answer they've got has not been the answer they want or need. So there is a sort of a big middle there between service request and complaint, and we live in that middle bit.
Totally agree, and I think that's something we can bottom out when we get the group together, and, you know, more than be delighted if you'd want to join that group, because, you know, you've given some really good feedback, so if you've got the time, of course, that would be really helpful.
More than happy. I'm a serial volunteer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments? I think we've had a good debate about this. We could have gone, I think, all night, but the fact that we've agreed to have the working group, I think that's the right place to look at that, and I think it's really encouraging. I will just pick up on a point that Councillor Jones made. He's quite correct. It used to be 7 working days, which I thought was too long for some requests. I think that's something we need to look at. You're saying, I mean, respectfully, what you're saying in terms of the numbers of members' inquiries being responded to, I think you said the average is 5 days. That might not chime with some members, it doesn't with me. I read in the report here, it says at 2.2 that if for any reason an inquiry can't be answered in 10 working days, we get a nice email telling us why. News to me, I have to chase to find out why. I don't get emails telling me that it's not been possible, and these are the reasons why, that we haven't responded within 10 working days. But I think that as a real bugbear for me, some of the issues we raised, it's not 10 days, it's 10 working days, and too many officers see it as a target rather than a deadline. And but as I say, we're going to have this working group, so all these things can be bottomed out there. But that is a valid point. We switched to 10 working days for I didn't really ever see a justification for that. It just happened, but something to be picked up, I think. But thank you, Tracy. That's really helpful. I think we all agree it's refreshing to hear somebody who wants to address some of the issues rather than just sort of paper over them. So thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to item 8, which is the work programme. I think really it's just to note if there are any comments, if there's any items people want added to it. I think it's quite clear the quarterly performance is something we need to come here as a matter of course. So if we could have that added. But are there any other items that members want added? Councillor Fletcher?
Thanks, Chair. Not so much added, but I did notice in the actions that we were given about the workforce and culture task and finish group. and the action has been noted as closed. Because we'd agreed not to establish it, the group at the time. It was, as I understood it, we agreed to postpone it because we were waiting for the results of the staff survey. So I don't think that is closed, in my estimate anyway, and I would want to see it appear somewhere later, obviously in line with when the staff survey is complete.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we know that. I think you're right. It wasn't closed as such, but moved down the line a little bit pending the outcome of the survey. So yeah, if we could just make a note of that. It's not closed. We do want to see it come back here, but at the appropriate time. Thank you. Any final comments? Thank you. In that case, it is 8:51. Thank you everyone for attending. The meeting is now closed.